In this part of the course, I'm going to be teaching you about working with XML. And I'll be talking to you about some of the requirements, and I'll do a demonstration of how to connect to XML as a source. We'll connect to XML as a target, and then I'll give you some information about how you might want to design your step control a little differently if you're working with XML, if it's coming out of a message queue. I'm going to cover that as a summary topic. We cover that in more detail in another training class, but I just want to give you a taste of what that's like in case you wanted to get started with it on your own. And I'll also talk specifically about this concept of configuring repeating nodes. As XML data, one of the things it can do is store this hierarchical data. So if you consider the examples that we've been following along throughout the training, you've got an order header and you've got its detail rows. Well, in XML that would be represented as an order node, and then the detail nodes would be subordinate to that. And so telling the XML adapter what the header node is and what the repeating nodes are is something that you need to do in order for it to handle the XML properly. So first of all, the requirements. You can work with XML whether it's a file on disk or whether it's located on some HTTP location. It could also be XML that's attached to a message in a Microsoft message queue. Specifically, if you're working with Microsoft Message Queue, I guess it gets a little confusing sometimes. When you're working in the workbench, you need a sample XML file to be working with, so you can get the schema information, the fields, and you can also use the test window. When you're doing that in the workbench, you're not making a direct connection at that point in time into the Microsoft Message Queue to get an XML out of a message. So it's just important to understand that you need to actually be working with an XML file on disk, even when you eventually you want to be working with some stuff that comes out of a message queue. Message queuing isn't necessarily optional. So as I was saying, you can work with XML in different types of locations, HTTP, or it can be a file on disk, or it can be in a message queue. Scribe, in the templates that we create, we quite often use Microsoft Message Queuing because of some of the scalability features that we've already talked about, and also it handles row failures a little bit differently, and I'll give you a little taste of that as well in this section of the class. So let's start off with connecting to XML as the source. I'll take you through a little bit of demonstration of setting that up and also setting up repeating nodes, and then point out some of the feature differences that are there with XML. So let's get started in the workbench, and I'll connect to XML as the source. And the XML adapter has a wizard that walks you through the connection steps, because there's a lot of different options and branches that could happen based on what type of XML you're connecting to. So I'll walk you down some of those paths or branches, and I won't complete every one of them, but I'll just give you a taste of what they look like so you have an idea. So on the source side, there are three different ways you can work with XML. Whether it's dynamic, that means it's going to be a message in a queue. It could be a persisted file, that means it's on disk, or it could be something that's at a web address. There is, generally speaking, some nice content with each step of the wizard that tells you what these different options are for. So first, I'll take you down the path of the web. You need to give it a source URL. So you would type in your HTTP address here. If it's something that authenticates, right, you could check this box and you can give it your username and password, and then you would also want to pick a schema file to work with. And the XML adapter supports both XSD and XDR types of schemas. Persisted file and dynamic, the wizard is just about the same, so I'm just going to go through the persisted file one. First, you need to pick your source document, so I'll do that here. I'll pick sales order XML. And then you can use the XML file, the sample XML file, as the schema file, but I'd recommend you use a real schema file because there's more features, it's more feature rich if you do that. So let's pick that sales order XDR, and then I'll click finish, and it takes me into the source connect window that you've seen before, or source configuration window. You'll notice that there isn't a custom query button here, so there's no opportunity to do a custom query with XML. You would have to do your query somewhere else to produce just the XML files with the right fields that you wanted. You'll see the object listed down here, I can select that. Update source feature will not work. The source keys feature will work if we can't figure out what the primary ID is. I click OK, and what happens next is before it brings me onto the workbench, it won't let me out of this window until I give it information about the repeating node. So in this case, I'm working with a sales order XML file that also has in it the order detail, and those are set up as a subordinate node. And so I can tell it which is the repeating node by selecting it here and then clicking repeating node, and it puts this little repeating node icon on it. And then when I click OK, it brings me to the workbench where I can then start working with it as a source and doing mappings and those types of things. I have a sample DTS file already built for that. And what I'd like to do now is just to take a couple of minutes to talk to you about the way that your DTS step control design would be different. So actually, I think what I'd like to do is bring up a different DTS first to demonstrate the differences. And this all has to do with the way that you design your step control and the error conditions. So if you remember back to some other things that we've already trained on, go back to the step control example, and I trained you on how to deal with each one of these cases that might happen, right? So on this seek step, I can get these 4 different results. And this is a typical design pattern for dealing with a result set that isn't XML, where just that, we're dealing with a result set. And if there's an error, we don't necessarily want to stop the whole job, because there could be other rows in this result set and we want to try processing those, right? So we might want to skip this first row because it had an error, but we want to keep continuing all the other source rows we have in our set. So that's why these are generally set to next row, okay? And you see in the graph display on the right that depicts the arrow going off to the right. Now with XML, we're going to set it to something else. I'll open up the XML example in just a moment, just to show you here on the screen how these arrows will change. Let's say in this case we had a success 0, and we wanted to change that to end job, and we're going to log an error. And you'll notice that now the options that are down in this area of the screen are now enabled. And what that allows you to do is it allows you to set a exit status for the DTS. And I should point out that this kind of a design pattern is what you use with XML when XML is coming out of a message queue. We're not training on all these features inside of this class. We do some more of this in the server class in our level 2 training. But when you're working with XML in a queue, you will have what's called an integration process on your Scribe server. And the job of that integration process is to monitor the Microsoft message queue and to look for messages with certain message labels. And when it finds the message with the right label, it pulls the message out, it opens the appropriate DTS file, and then it passes that XML message that it just pulled out of the queue along to the DTS as a source, just for that run of the DTS. And if you're in a situation where you might have sequencing errors, let's say you're dealing with again, header and detail, or no, let's say it's different. You have account data and you're all customer data, and you're also sharing order data. And maybe the sales order, for whatever reason, the sales order insert tries to get over into the target system before the account and the customer insert has happened. And that's a situation that the target system won't allow. You can't have a sales order without a customer. But it's also a situation that might be caused by a sequencing problem. You're not necessarily in charge of what order the XML messages come out of the target or come out of the source, and in what order they're processed to go in the target. So that's a situation that may heal itself. So if you just wait another half a minute, or maybe 30 seconds, 30 seconds is a half a minute, if you wait maybe 2 minutes, it's possible that that account insert will actually happen. So what you can do is that you can say, I want to set the exit status to retry. And what that will do is that if this message, XML message fails, it will tell the integration process that called this DTS file that I want to retry that message. And it actually takes the message out of the in queue and puts it into a retry queue where you can cycle through it a number of times for a number of minutes. Right? So generally speaking, when you're working with non-XML, you want to use, and result sets, you want to work with next row. I'll show you what it looks like when I connect into XML as my source and I'm working with something that's coming out of a message queue. you'll notice that the step control looks a little different. And instead of going to next row, I'm going to end job. Right? So for most of those error conditions where I'm logging an error, I'm having it drop out of the DTS and set the exit status appropriately, either to failed or to retry. If you set it to retry, it'll put the XML message in the retry queue. If you set it to failed, it'll put it immediately into the failed queue. So here's another slide. I'll leave this up here for a moment so you can read it with some other tips. Again, I won't train on all of these, but the most important of them is what I just showed you, and that's this tip that's down here, right? Setting the exit status appropriately. And you want to evaluate whether you think that's a condition that can fix itself or not. And if it's something you think can fix itself, like the one I talked about with the account not quite being there yet, and the order insert or the invoice insert failing because the account isn't there, if you think that can fix itself, you set the exit status to retry. If it's a situation that you know can't fix itself, no reason to retry, you can just set it to failed. All right, so now let's talk about working with XML as the target. Again, you have an option of working with different connection methods. They're slightly different for a target than they are for a source, so I'll show you that in a moment. Again, you need to be careful about setting up your repeating node information. You can actually, when you're working with XML as a target, you can set up a document break field. So you can take all of the results of your steps and from all the source rows that you're working through in your result set, and you can output those as a single XML file, or you can output those as individual XML files by using the document break. There are a few operations that aren't supported. For example, you can't do updates of XML or deletes, you just do inserts. And you can't do the commit intervals on the all steps tab. So let me take it back to the workbench, and I will do a connection into XML as a target. So you have these options here. I'll start with the one on the bottom. If you're doing it by email, so in this case you want to take whatever your source is, you want to process it, you want to output XML that you either want to attach it as the body of an email message, or you want it to be the body of the email message, or you want to attach it to the email message. So I'll pick a schema file here so I can continue through that. And then you see here you've got some settings for your email. So you've got a recipient list, who you're sending the email to, what is the subject of the email, and here's where you decide whether you want it to be in the message body or whether you want it to be an attachment to the message. And then you also have to provide it with the SMTP settings for the SMTP server that you're going to be sending this mail through. So if it's something you need authentication for, you would need to provide a username and password in these two fields. Now, if you had previously set up your Scribe server with SMTP settings, those would be inherited and put into this dialog automatically for you. So let me see, let's go back to there. You can output XML into a message queue. All right, so again, I have to pick a schema file. Next, it'll ask me what the name of the message queue is. If you don't know where to get the message queue name, I'll show you here. If you go into Manage Computer, under Services and Applications, there's an application for Microsoft Message Queuing. The Scribe queues are created as private queues. You could open the properties of the queue, and even though it doesn't look like a field right here, you can copy that field name. I can go back here and I can drop that queue name in here. So this is the name of the message queue on this server, or it could be some other server if that's the way you have it set up, where you're going to output that XML message. You also want to think about including a message label. You may have multiple types of data you're dealing with, so you might want to create a label that says account modifications, or one that says order modifications, those types of things. And you have some options for what type of a message you're creating in the queue, whether it's recoverable or an express type of message. And if you're doing XML and you're writing it out to the web, You need a output URL and document name. If it requires authentication for that site that you're hitting, you can use the username and password fields here. If you're using the put or FTP, you can choose whether you want to overwrite the file, or you can choose whether you want to append a date and timestamp to the end of the XML file name. And what I'm going to do is pick File. So this is a situation where I'd be outputting the XML to a file on disk. And I'm going to choose Append Date and Time to the file name, and off I go. And when I click Finish, I'll be brought to the Target Configure window. And it's available here under XML Objects. I want to work with this order structure that's in the XML. You'll notice that the only thing I can do is an insert, so I'll pick that. And then it will stop me here and ask me for information about the document break and the repeating nodes. So you use this to fill it in. So if you want all the rows that you're processing from your result set and your source to be in one XML file, you just leave the document break up here to none. But if you wanted to split it into multiple XML documents, you would pick a field, probably order number, and it would break out a new XML document for each new order number. You also want to fill in the repeating node information. So especially if I'm putting it all in one XML file, right? I'm not doing a document break. I want to be able to tell it where I create a new section for this XML document. So I pick order information, I pick repeating node, and for this repeating node configuration in the target, I also have to pick what field I want to break on. So you pick your node break. Over here it's going to be the order number. Now this XML that I'm creating, the schema also has items in it. So I'm going to pick item as another repeating node and use the line number, right? So I've got a number line 1 through X for all the lines on my sales order, and that's how I configure that. Now you've got some other options about the type of encoding that you use for the XML. So you've got several options there for that. I click OK, and when I close that, I'm back here on the workbench and I can map my fields into it. So I've got an XML file that's all filled out that I can use. And I'm just going to review the way this is set up. Now, one thing I haven't showed you yet is that those windows about the nodes, the repeating nodes and the document breaks show up automatically when you're doing the source window configuration or the target configuration. But if you want to get back to them, you don't go to either of those two places to get it. So that can be confusing for people. So I want to show you what you do. If XML is on your source, you would choose Source Adapter Settings. In this case, XML is on our target, so I do Target Adapter Settings, and I can get back to that window. So let's take a look at what this is going to do. I want to run a little demo where I actually run some data through and output the XML. And first, let me see if there's anything currently in that folder, and there isn't, so that's good. And then I'm going to leave the document break set to none. The rest of the stuff is already set up for me, and I'm saying that's okay. I'm going to run this. It was successful. And what it's done is it's created this new XML file out here. So apparently the settings were set to append a date and timestamp to the name. That's helpful if you don't want to overwrite the file. And if I open it up, you can take a look at the way it's structured. So all of these 13 orders and their detail are, actually it was not, it's 13 total rows I think, are all inside of this one XML file. So here's an order header, and here's its details. Now I'm going to change around the configuration. Let me delete this first. And instead we're going to do a document break. So I go back to Target Adapter Settings. And this time I'm going to do a break on order number. And that will produce individual XML files for me. So let's run that. And so now I've got one XML file for each one of the orders that came from my source, and it's breaking out those documents based on that order ID field. So I take a look inside of it, and I see I've just got one order with its detail lines in it. So again, I just want to take a quick look and make sure I covered everything on this slide. Yeah, I think I have. And that's it for the XML demonstration. Thank you.